Since its release in 2003, Elf has secured its spot amongst the holiday movie classics that audiences revisit every Christmas.
Welcome to the party, pal!
While also launching both Will Ferrell's career as a leading man and Jon Favreau's as a top Hollywood director. However, we came very close to getting a much different version of the movie, which would have been darker and wouldn't even have starred Will Ferrell. And while a sequel to the movie we got was written, it ultimately never happened. So let's dive in and find out why it was never made and what could have been Elf 2: Buddy Saves Christmas. Elf was conceived in the early 90s by first-time screenwriter David Berenbaum, who had recently moved to LA and was missing cold and snowy East Coast winters. Inspired by the Rankin and Bass TV special, which saw Rudolph leave home because he didn't fit in, Berenbaum modeled the script after Tom Hanks' Big, which saw a child transform into an adult while keeping his naive, childlike mind.
Yes?
I don't get it.
However, the script would languish in development hell for about a decade, and considering that the film was written in the early 90s, long before Will Ferrell even appeared in a movie and just as he was beginning to gain recognition on SNL, he wasn't even initially considered. Instead, Jim Carrey was the first choice to play Buddy, who today is no stranger to starring in blockbuster Christmas movies such as The Grinch and A Christmas Carol. And given Carrey's flair for physical comedy, it's not hard to imagine him in the role. However, it's debatable if he would have embraced Buddy's cheerful innocence like Ferrell did, as Ferrell was the one who pushed for Buddy to be more childlike and say whatever pops into his head.
Sorry I can't ride with you the rest of the way up, but this is where my dad works. Well, have a good time. Oh, I forgot to give you a hug!
However, another actor that shot to stardom in the 90s who would be difficult to imagine in the role is Chris Farley, who was also considered and heavily favored by the then producers. Farley in the role would have completely changed the tone of the movie and given us a much louder and boisterous interpretation of the character, something writer David Berenbaum wasn't keen on, which is why in protest he let the option on the script expire so that he could go off in search of producers that shared his vision. And once he found those producers, their attention turned to finding the right director, one of whom they approached felt the film wasn't edgy enough, and as a result, worried nobody would go see it. To rectify this, he suggested that Jovie, eventually played by Zooey Deschanel, should have a physically abusive boyfriend who shares her grimy New York apartment. Eventually, the script would find its way to Jon Favreau, after Will Ferrell had signed on. However, Favreau wasn't crazy about the script, which at this time was a little darker. For example, at the beginning of the script, the other elves made fun of Buddy for being different and unable to work as quickly as they could. Favreau felt it would make more sense when Buddy is doing all these good things in New York if his behavior was informed by his childhood in the North Pole, where the other elves were good-natured and optimistic, regardless of the fact that Buddy always screws up and doesn't fit in.
I'm gonna be a little bit short on today's quota.
It's all right, buddy.
The climax of the film was radically different too, and much larger in scale as cops would have chased Buddy down Fifth Avenue, shooting at him as he shot back. It also had police helicopters circling and cop cars swarming Central Park as Buddy leaps off the Empire State Building onto one of the helicopters to try and escape. Favreau felt this was too over the top, resembling something out of the Blues Brothers, and changed it to a slice-of-life news story intercut with Central Park Rangers chasing Buddy and Santa that Favreau shot to look like the Nazgul from The Lord of the Rings. The ending, which sees Jovie leading a crowd and singing a rousing rendition of Santa Claus is Coming to Town that provides Santa's sleigh with enough Christmas spirit to fly, wasn't in the original script either, and instead magic dust was used to make the reindeers fly and get the sleigh off the ground. This change was inspired by the casting of Zooey Deschanel. As Favreau looked to cast the role of Jovie, which Zooey would go on to play, his goal was to cater the part to whoever he cast. For example, one actress he considered before her was good at skateboarding. Deschanel, however, had a cabaret act at the time, and after Favreau learned that she had a great Doris Day voice, rewrote the script, adding the shower singing scene and reworking the ending, giving the movie its emotional climax. What led Favreau to sign on though and make all these changes was the realization that he should make the world that Buddy grew up in a pastiche of the stop-motion Rankin and Bass Christmas specials that Favreau grew up watching. And by doing that, it would dictate the tone of the rest of the film, which led him to lighten the tone of the script and make Buddy a much more innocent character. Right before they were to start shooting, however, Wanda Sykes, who had been cast as Jovie's boss and the manager of Gimbals, dropped out at the last minute, leading Favreau to call up his friend Faison Love, asking him to do him a favor and replace her. And his casting would give us some insight years later into why a sequel never happened. But we'll come back to that in a bit. Once shooting wrapped, one very important thing happened that threatened to ruin the entire project. Old School, the frat comedy film which featured Ferrell in a hilarious supporting role as Frank the Tank, had come out and was an enormous hit, leading both Ferrell and the studio to worry that his legions of new fans wouldn't accept him as Buddy the Elf.
The first time we tested the movie, we did 2 screenings. We did one that was more of a family-focused audience. And it worked great with them. And then I'm looking at the crowd lineup for the second screening, and it's like a bunch of frat guys from USC. And we might get eviscerated in this. And but it played for that audience too.
After Elf proved to be a huge hit, the studio immediately went to work on prepping a sequel. To write it, they turned to Scott Armstrong, who co-wrote Ferrell's breakout hit Old School. Elf 2 begins 10 years after the first film ended, with Buddy and Jovie still happily married, and parents to a now 10-year-old daughter Susie. Since we last saw him, Buddy's become a successful children's book author, specializing in Christmas stories, inspired by true stories from his childhood. After realizing that living in a cramped New York City apartment is not the best environment to raise a kid, the family of 3 move out to the suburbs. Once there, Susie befriends a pair of sisters who are the 2 most popular girls in school. As she starts to hang out with them more than her dad, she starts to realize how odd her dad actually is, becoming embarrassed by him. In an effort to try and win back his daughter's love and affection, Buddy tries to be normal, as he ditches the elf suit and changes his name to Brian. Eventually, Leon the Snowman shows up in need of Buddy's help, and informs him that Papa Elf, who uses his elf magic to fit millions of presents into Santa's sack for delivery on Christmas, has been kidnapped by Cole Kringle, who resides in the South Pole. Leon the Snowman then sends Buddy to Switzerland, where he meets Santa at the Summit of Santas, and learns that the Santa he knows and loves is just one of many, as every country has their own. As the Santas worry that Christmas in America will be ruined without Papa Elf, they decide to send Buddy on a mission to the South Pole to rescue him, and bring him back in time for Christmas. Also, in keeping with the style of the Rankin and Bass influence from the first film, once Buddy gets to the South Pole, we see that Cole Kringle is claymation. And Cole Kringle is upset because Santa made Christmas the same day as his birthday, depriving him of presents on 2 special days a year. Eventually, Buddy defeats Cole Kringle, saves Papa Elf, and returns him to the North Pole, where Jovie and Susie are waiting to greet him, as Susie finally accepts Buddy for who he is after he saves Christmas. Except he didn't, as Papa Elf laments that he doesn't have enough time to shrink all of the millions of presents into Santa's sack. However, after delivering the gifts to the children of their own countries, the other Santas from around the world agree to pick up the slack, delivering presents from foreign countries to American kids, as this Christmas wouldn't be about the presents you get, but the act of giving itself. Will Ferrell would be offered $29 million to reprise his role, which he turned down, as he'd say that he worried that the sequel wouldn't live up to the first film, and that fans would think he was just doing it for the money. However, that might not be entirely true, as according to James Caan, Ferrell actually wanted to return for the sequel, but would only do so if Jon Favreau didn't return to direct.
We were going to do it, and the director and Will didn't get along very well. So Will wanted to do it, and the guy wouldn't. He didn't want that the director, and he had it in his contract. It was one of those things.
Even though since Elf, Favreau has proven himself as an incredibly talented and skilled director, with hits at the box office to prove it, when he signed on to direct Elf, he had only directed one other movie, Made, which was a crime comedy film and nothing like Elf. Combine that with the fact that Will Ferrell, who had just finished shooting the frat comedy Old School, now found himself running around New York City in green tights, led him to seriously question the project, as he worried that it would flop and destroy his career as a leading man before it began.
I mean, I remember running around in New York in that outfit, literally thinking, this is the end. This is the end of my career.
Really?
Yeah.
Ferrell's apprehension would also extend to Favreau's direction, as he didn't quite trust the then sophomore director who had yet to really prove himself.
Will didn't trust John's judgment from day one.
Okay.
And basically tried to get what they call it when everybody's, come on, we out of here. I'm like,
a walkout?
Yeah, like.
Regardless, when you have a film like Elf that quickly becomes a modern classic and a staple of the holiday season, you risk potentially tarnishing the legacy of the original with a less than stellar follow-up. So maybe it's a good thing that Elf 2 never happened.
You've been asked to do Elf a lot, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please don't do that.
See? Yeah, I've been asked and begged and prodded to do a sequel of that movie, and I'm with you.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.